Hello and welcome to this electrical science training video. In this video we're going to continue considering our subject of how to quantify the amount of electricity that flows around a circuit. Now if you cast your mind back, you may remember that electricity is made up of loads and loads of tiny little subatomic particles called electrons, and when those electrons flow around a circuit we call that flow of electrons electricity, and we use it to transfer energy from the start of a circuit to the end of a circuit. Now the problem with these electrons is that they are so incredibly small that if we were to try and do maths involving the number of electrons that were flowing, it would make the numbers involved absolutely enormous, and it would make all electrical calculations really quite tricky to do. So what we do is, instead of counting individual electrons, we bunch a load of them together into a big group, and we call that big group or bunch of electrons 1 coulomb. So when we say that electricity is flowing around the circuit, we're not counting individual electrons that are flowing, we're counting bunches of electrons called coulombs, and we introduced the concept of that in a previous video, as we say. Now what we're going to do in this video is we're going to kind of build on that a little bit and see how the concept of the coulomb, or the bunches of electrons, relate to current measured in amperes. So let's just remind ourselves of some really important SI units that we'll need for this video. Okay, so let's go through this one at a time. So first of all, we've got the concept of electrical charge. Okay, and you may remember that charge is measured in coulombs. Okay, coulombs, and remember that's just a big bunch of electrons, and we assign that the mathematical symbol, sorry, the unit symbol. We assign it the unit symbol C, and we give it the mathematical symbol capital Q. So we might say something along the lines of Q is equal to 2C or something like that. So we see that as Q equals 2C, but we would read it as the charge in a circuit is equal to 2 coulombs, or 2 big bunches of electrons. Now the other SI unit that we need is the concept of electrical current. Okay, electrical current. And again, we've done other videos on this talking about the SI units, so we're not going to go into masses of depth of it here. It's enough to say at the moment that current is measured in amperes, and we assign it the unit symbol A, and we give it the mathematical symbol capital I, like that. So we might write or read something that says something like I is equal to 13A, and again, that's kind of the letters that we read, but we would read that as current is equal to 13 amperes, or amps for short. So that's the current flow. More on that in a moment. And the final SI unit that we need is the concept of time. So time, which of course we know we measure in seconds, assign it the unit symbol lowercase s, and we give this the mathematical symbol lowercase t for time. So again, we might read something like t is equal to 30s, and we think time is equal to 30 seconds or something along those lines. Now, how do these all relate to each other? Well, it all comes back to this concept of electrical charge in coulombs. Remember those big bunches of electrons? And we think, right, let's say we've got 1 coulomb, so 1 bunch of electrons flowing around a circuit every second. Well, that is actually the definition of 1 ampere. So they're related to each other like this. We would say that current is equal to charge divided by time. Okay, so that's an interesting concept, because we can now start to kind of volley in, perhaps let's put in now the unit names. So what we would now say is that amperes, or amps for short if you get to know it really well, amperes is equal to coulombs over seconds. So you've got coulombs divided by seconds. Now what's quite interesting about this is that when you start to look at that, it's starting to look a little bit like the formula for lots of other SI units. So let's take a classic one. Let's think about speed. Now again, we might think of speed in miles per hour in the UK, but really the SI unit for speed, the way it should be defined, is meters per second. And another way of writing that is meters divided by seconds. So it's the number of meters that an object is traveling every second. Well, in the same way, the ampere is measured in coulombs per second. So the number of coulombs, the number of big bunches of electrons flowing around the circuit every second. So let's try and put this into mathematical terms. What we end up with then is something that looks a little bit like this. So we would say that I, which is the mathematical symbol for current, is equal to Q for charge divided by T for time. So there we've got I is equal to Q over T. So what we've got there is a fundamental formula that helps us to define what current actually is. Now, the way that this differs from that other SI unit that we kind of mentioned, just because it's a good example of speed, is that if we said that speed is equal to meters per second, that unit doesn't have a special name. We just keep it as meters per second. So we could have gone through our entire lives referring to current as coulombs per second, but we've given that the special name of amperes. So what that means is that if we've got 1 coulomb flowing for 1 second, so if we say that 1 coulomb flows for 1 second, then that gives us 1 ampere of current. And that leads us to the nice conclusion that current is actually the flow rate of electricity. So to try and understand this, let's go back to the old classic example of electricity being a bit like water flowing through a pipe. When water flows through, say, a hose pipe, we're interested in a couple of things about it. We're interested in how much pressure it's under, and that's like the voltage of an electrical system, which again we've discussed in another video. But the other thing that we're interested in about that water is its flow rate. How many litres per second are passing through that pipe? Well, the flow rate of water through a pipe is a little bit like the flow rate of electricity through a cable or a conductor. And we call that flow rate the number of coulombs per second, the number of big bunches of electrons per second flowing around the circuit. We refer to that flow rate of electricity as the current, and we give it the special unit name of amperes. Now we can use this for other calculations. So let's say we've got a situation where we've got, let's say 20 coulombs. So we've got 20 coulombs flowing through a circuit every, let's say 5 seconds. Okay, so 20 coulombs every 5 seconds. We can put this into our calculation to figure out how much current that represents. So I is equal to Q over T. So we would say that 20 coulombs divided by 5 seconds gives us 4 amperes. So if 20 coulombs are flowing around our circuit every 5 seconds, then we can just do the math, and that tells us that we have 4 amperes flowing through that circuit. However, it's pretty unlikely that we're ever going to need to do that as electricians. In fact, this formula very rarely comes up for electricians. But there is one interesting side effect to this, and that's if we change this formula around a bit. So instead of writing it as I equals Q over T, we can rearrange it, we can transpose it so it looks like this. Q is equal to I multiplied by T. Okay, so it's the same formula, we've just jigged it around. Now what this tells us is that if we know how much current is flowing and for how long, we can use that to figure out how much charge is flowing, how many coulombs are flowing, so an idea of how many big bunches of electrons are flowing. So let's say, again, we've got something nice and simple. Let's say we've got something like 10 amps is flowing for 5 seconds. Okay, so that could be a realistic circuit in a property, 10 amps flowing for 5 seconds. We do 10 amps times by 5 seconds, and that's going to give us 50 coulombs, 50 big bunches of those electrons flowing around a circuit. So 50 of those big bunches of electrons have flowed through that circuit in that 5 second period. Now again, this isn't really something that we need to kind of think about as electricians. We tend to think in amperes as being our base unit. However, if you're going into something like some high level electronics or something like that, then you may well end up using these formulas a little bit. But what this video's done, it's given us a couple of new formulas to remember. I equals Q over T, which can be transferred to become Q equals I times T. And these are actually the kind of questions that do come up from time to time in your electrical exams. So it is pretty important to get those locked into your brain. What it's also done is it's given us a chance to understand a little bit better what amperes are. It is the number of coulombs flowing per second in a circuit, so it's the flow rate of electricity. So those are the things to really take away from this video. So we're going to conclude there. As always, I'd just like to say, if you are finding this content helpful and you'd like to donate to the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description below. As always, there's no pressure to do that because we're living in times of economic hardship, but it's just if you'd like to contribute to the channel to help it keep ticking along, then that would be most gratefully received, but absolutely no pressure. The content will arrive one way or another. And what we're going to do in a future video is have a little look at how we can combine some of these different formulas together that we've learned in order to analyze a circuit in a little bit more depth. But as always, all that remains in this video is to say thank you very much for watching.